Through the rearview mirror, looking at one remarkable year this morning on For the Record. Good morning, I'm Neil Heinen. While it may have seemed like just one long election, and it was that too, 2012 was a year of profound change. It may take most of 2013 to actually realize how much our nation and our world has changed. And as always, there are various opinions on whether that change was positive or negative. So I decided to invite the perspectives of three folks who do opinion for a living. My guests are all journalists and are all members of the Association of Opinion Journalists, an organization to which I also belong. I welcome to For the Record Madison Magazine editor and WISC editorial board member Brennan Nardi, Wisconsin State Journal editorial page editor Scott Milford, and Progressive Magazine managing editor Amit Paul. And a necessary acknowledgement up front. The world did not end this week, a point of some discussion in popular culture having to do with the Mayan calendar ending. It was a distraction, as was hiring a new football coach, among other things. But while we will touch on some things unusual and even funny, we know that any review of this year ends with the heartbreaking tragedy at Sandy Hook Elementary School. And we will talk about that as well. Kind of a bookend to a year, and thank you all for coming. And please realize that the order in which I introduced you this is not Brennan, so, but people will get that by the end of the show. I kind of want to start at the beginning, Scott, if only because at this time last year, Democrats were as excited as they had been in a long, long time. I mean, they were gathering signatures at a rate that surprised me. As I remember, it surprised you. Mm-hmm. And the recall now seemed inevitable. And what did we learn from that?
Well, I think we learned a couple things. One is that people really don't like recalls, especially when they get into the double digits. I mean, remember, there had been recalls of state senators. There were more recalls of state senators on that same ballot going after Governor Walker. And people were just
a Supreme Court race that sort of had the feeling of a political race.
It was the endless campaign, and I think as much as it, to some degree, was an endorsement of Walker, I think more than that, it was a rejection of the endless recall process. I think the other big thing that we learned, especially in light of President Obama's big win later in the year, I think we learned that the union issue specifically doesn't work as well or resonate as well for the Democrats as the more general issue of income inequality, the middle class needing some help. I think that that there's a difference there in that message, and we have to remember, even in Dane County, not a majority of people are in unions. So I think, remember, the president didn't come here for the recall election. Right. He was in Chicago, he flew to Minnesota, he specifically didn't come here, and I think he didn't want to get into a message that might not work for him, or a race that his people were suggesting to him was going down. So I think those are the two big things that I would take away. I'm thinking,
you had the politics on the cover like twice in the first 4 months of this year. One was Mark Eisen's piece, which ran in the magazine and then online, and then I think you had Rebecca Ryan and there were a couple of differing views on it, and I think they sort of foreshadowed that, didn't they? That that this was more than just a labor issue. There was really thoughts about Governor Walker's relationship with the voters of this state, how they felt about recall elections.
Well, yeah, I think my takeaway is that I think we're more partisan than we thought we were, and even coming into the November election, it wasn't just an independent voter situation. It was voters who were not affiliated with the parties, and they were partisan. They knew who they were going to vote for, and the recalls maybe foreshadowed that a little bit. I think that we are now maybe a microcosm of the national
Wisconsin.
Wisconsin, the national electorate, and we are a divided state. And what we do now moving forward, we have Ron Johnson and Tammy Baldwin, two very different U.S. senators. What we do moving forward, I think, will be a bit of a predictor on so goes, the union.
Yeah, the progressives certainly celebrated that division. I mean, that it was an important ideological division, philosophical division, was it not, Amit?
Yes, Neil. As some viewers may know, we were founded in 1909 by the legendary Wisconsin governor and senator Fighting Bob La Follette. Right. And La Follette said that recall was necessary to counter the evils of misrepresentation and deceit. And we felt that in this case, that truly applied to Scott Walker. What happened, though, of course, was that he outspent his opponents by a factor of 8 to 1, 10 to 1, 12 to 1. The opposition was feckless, both in terms of its candidate and also strategically. They failed to convince enough voters that what he did rose to the level of high crimes and misdemeanors. So that threshold question was never fully answered, and that's why, it fell short the way it did in the end.
Yeah.
And on that note, it also showed that, where is the next generation of Democratic leaders? I think that's part of what you're seeing now with the new Senate Minority Leader, who's a young guy.
Yep.
That after Falk lost and after Barrett lost, people were asking that question.
Sure. Huge change, and which has been talked about just in the last few weeks, as well as kind of where is Scott Walker today? I think right after the recall, I mean, his star was as big on the national stage as it ever been. But I asked the question: is that sustainable? And is the Republican Party really that interested in Scott Walker? I mean, how would you assess that today?
I'm not so sure. I think the party's more interested in Paul Ryan than Scott Walker, even though governors typically have better shots at the presidency. I mean, on the issue of collective bargaining for public workers, he's sort of being outdone, if you're a real true believing right-winger, by some other governors, including even the Michigan governor.
Right.
The other thing is, I think he understands that there was more to that recall than just the people still really like Scott Walker, that there was the anomaly there of it being a recall election. So he's got to look forward. He's got another election in only 2 years, and you're already seeing him swat away a couple things that he just doesn't want to go there, including the same-day registration, right to work, those kinds of things. So I think he sees that he has to moderate to some degree here to set himself up for that next election.
And that's just, but it makes me think, Brendan, of the idea of this being a divided state. And can he govern a divided state?
Well, his enemies are going to continue to be his enemies. What I'm looking at really is, Robin Vos, the state Senate Majority Leader, who said just this week that he's looking at, bipartisan, conversations, looking at the ethics rules and things like that. And Mark Pocan, who's heading to Congress, but who was with Robin Vos during this conversation, said the same thing, that we need to come together as a legislature. And I think that's moving forward. We need not to think about Scott Walker's future. We need to think about ours here in Wisconsin.
We're going to talk about more politics, presidential this time, when we come back right after this.
Was a very historic race in that Wisconsin chose me to trust with those significant challenges, and I am looking forward and ready to do that.
So in the fall, we have this anomaly of states around the country electing all one-party government, and for the most part Republicans, both houses of the legislature, governors, and then we re-elect Barack Obama as president, and the state of Wisconsin elects Tammy Baldwin, not just Tammy, but Tammy over Tommy, to be senator. Take a shot at it, Amit. How do you describe this?
Great campaign. She ran a great campaign. She managed to convince people that this wasn't the old Tommy of the 1980s and 1990s, that he was a lobbyist, sort of a batter for special interests, for Wall Street and moneyed interests. And, he came across as surly, especially in the debates. He didn't give a good enough reason as to why he should go to the Senate, other than, he was entitled to it. And, she made history by being elected. Amazing, absolutely incredible.
Yeah. Brendan, you and I have talked about this a lot, but Tammy Baldwin in Wisconsin, Elizabeth Warren in Massachusetts. I think that's just the tip of the demographic iceberg that we saw sort of break apart in November. But it seems significant to me that these two women were elected to the U.S. Senate.
I think so, and they're very, very liberal. So it'll be interesting to see if they can put their sort of partisan, ideology aside a little bit and come together. That's what I would very much like to see, because I think that's what Wisconsin wants to see. I think Tommy could have been poised to do that a little bit more than Tammy, but I think there's great opportunity, and there's Tim Kaine in Virginia is trying to bring people together. So again, that's kind of my message here, is let's all come together. But I think for Tammy too, that down ticket from the presidential certainly played into it a little bit, and then that 47% that just stuck and stuck and stuck and wouldn't go away, and that's Tammy's wheelhouse.
Yeah, but she didn't just convince people that Tommy wasn't the same Tommy. He wasn't the same Tommy. I mean, out on the campaign trail, he just seemed to think this was his, and why did he have to bother with going around talking to people? And it used to be, he loved going around talking to people, so I think that was part of it too.
Yep.
And I think there were some coattails, but definitely Baldwin's win was the salve on the recall wound for the
Wisconsin
Democrats and
Democrats,
progressives.
And you do have to feel a little bit sad for Tommy. I mean, he means well, campaigned poorly, but in terms of that surly approach, but meant well. He loves Wisconsin. He wanted to go, to Congress.
Yep.
And he even had his own party just really beat him up in the primary.
Yeah, that's right.
I think he was blindsided by that and didn't think they'd go there because he's Tommy. He's the legend, and they just really went after him. I mean, they went after him at least as tough as Tammy did.
And that put him in an untenable position, because he was forced to go to the right much more than he actually is, and I think that hurt him at least a bit in the actual campaign.
Which is something that seems to be the Republicans have to do a little bit more than the Democrats. They have to go further to the right and then come back. Then the Democrats have to go to the left and come back, and that seems to be a flaw in their model as they look at elections.
And one that's been talked about in the last couple of months, right? More than I've ever heard it talked about. We've got to do something different. Which brings me to the idea that one of the themes of the year was percentages. 47%, 1%, 99%. We heard more about percentages than I think we have since middle school. And yet it says something that I think has probably been ignored, which is, what is the makeup of this country?
Yeah, and a good leader pulls people together, and I think the 47% was powerful in a bad way for Mitt Romney because it split people up. I think the other thing that's happening is there's at least a poll a day. Now, that's sort of changed, where it used to be you didn't have several polls a day telling you what was going to happen, and I think this number focus and this, with the interdigital age, we heard at the AOJ convention from the Georgetown professor that Barack Obama had like 18 different feeds, email feeds, targeting 18 different flavors of people who he might vote for. So the numbers game is so much more prevalent than it used to be in politics to begin with.
The Occupy it was a huge story in 2012. I don't know if anybody's going to remember it in 2013. But, does it have any lasting impact, Amit, as far as you're concerned?
Yes, Neil. I really think it brought up the issue of inequality onto the top of the agenda in a way that wasn't there before, even in the aftermath of the financial collapse. Studies show that the media covered this issue much more in late 2011 and early 2012 than they had done before. I also feel that Occupy hasn't disappeared as much as morphed into these different sort of groups that are working at a grassroots level, not necessarily in a coherent way, but in different venues, using different avenues in different parts of the country, and that's why you don't hear about it as much anymore. But they're still sort of carrying on the good work.
All right, we're going to move into the lightning round here next when we come back right after this.
One of the things we're likely to do after the holidays is bring in some mental health professionals, some people that work at hospitals and clinics around the state, and try and get to the heart of that question even before we talk about the other elements, because whether it's a firearm or some of these people in the past have used explosives or other things like that, what do we do to keep people from getting to the point where they're even willing and capable of committing an act like this?
My guest this morning, looking at the year in review, Scott Milford, the editorial page editor of the Wisconsin State Journal, Amit Paul, who is the managing editor of The Progressive, and Brennan Nardi, the editor of Madison Magazine and a member of the WISC TV editorial board. With that comment from Scott Walker, we might as well get right to the issue of really violence in America, I guess. I mean, I'd like to think that one of the results of Sandy Hook is that it's broadened the discussion just beyond gun control. But as I said in an editorial recently, you can talk about gun control now. You can talk about mental illness now. You can talk about video games and freedom of speech. You can talk about privacy, because everybody seems to want to do something. And whereas in any other incident, all of these would be in such conflict that you could never get to any common dialogue. I hope, Brennan, that we're getting to a point where that nuance can
I agree.
happen.
I think the issue itself is a huge uphill battle, but I think it's a huge opportunity. When we going through the recession, everybody all of a sudden learned about economics and government and healthcare reform. Everybody all of a sudden was becoming more informed on the issue. I think gun control has that similar opportunity. I think the challenge is not to let the sort of extremes on either side take the issue and run with it. So, if the NRA says the answer is more guns, well, that kind of flies in the face of sort of conservative idea that more is better. And then, if we have, if the issue becomes, banned on assault weapons to satisfy the Democratic agenda, I think there's a challenge there too. So I think the people need to come together in a moment like this.
Yeah. Do you know kind of how you're going to approach all this in the weeks and months to come?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there are some things, even with Washington gridlock, there's some things that could happen. I think you probably will see more. We already have seen in Madison a little bit more security that schools can do. There probably will be some investment in that. I don't think they're going to arm teachers, but I think you may see more security. There are some things that the president didn't do before the election because he didn't think it was politically palatable by executive order, that he can do to pull in some of the excesses of how we sell guns and how we do that. I don't know all the specifics of that, but I've read that he has some power. I would be surprised if we've been for lots of different flavors of what we think are sensible gun control. Sure. I don't know why the NRA, for example, why is it so bad to consistently have a background check? Why in today's world with all the technology we have, why can't we do the same check at a gun show that we do if you go out to Gander Mountain or something? Yep. So I don't know. I would think that they would want to at least have something like that they could say, okay, we're for this, and because this shooting of the kids, I think, has really changed the mindset of a lot of people.
Amit, if I could impose upon your frequent writing in The Progressive on international affairs, what was the big world story in 2012?
Two, Neil, very briefly. Number one, the global move away from nuclear power. Germany, the European economic powerhouse, has decided to phase it out within 10 years. Japan itself is rethinking nuclear power. Even China had a temporary pause on using nuclear power. Yeah. India, there have been a number of protests against new nuclear power plants. The United States is almost a singular holdout, even here the Obama administration is stressing renewables much more, so hopefully we'll see that trend continue. Yep. The second one was the US-China. The pivot, as they say, toward what I'm afraid of is a coming confrontation with China. The sending of troops to Australia, the getting together with Burma in the India-US strategic pact, that's a bit worrisome.
Yep. Hurricane Sandy, Brennan, was the big weather event of the year. This little dusting that we had this week, notwithstanding, but I thought it stimulated discussion of global climate change. It's been ratcheting up, but again, it added a level of sophistication to it, I think.
Absolutely, and I think, you know, in the 80s, when I was growing up, it was the nuclear war threat, and 2001, you know, the 90s were booming, and 2001 it was the terrorist attacks. I think for kids now, and kids are incredibly adept at pushing agendas on their parents and then throughout the community, but I think the issue is going to be climate change. It's on Obama's radar. It's global warming is an agenda item for him, and I hope to see some real conversation about it. I don't think we'll see much action on it, but some real conversation on it. So yeah, it's here. You know, 99% of scientists say it's, you know, it's here, yep. And I hope we start to deal with it a little bit better.
What have we left out here, Scott?
You know, in terms of public education, I think one of the things that you know, we had the big battle. I guess there's more agreement on that than I think a lot of people are willing to admit. We had the big battle over Madison Prep, which was the Urban League's special school. It was going to be targeting low-achieving Black and Latino students. Nothing happened, but lo and behold, now the Urban League is working with the school district on an after-school program that's very similar, and it's within the district. And so we are getting kind of to where we wanted to go. And I think then at the state level, you have Scott Walker working with Tony Evers, yep. The superintendent, who was the teachers union's pick. They haven't been totally satisfied with him, but they've been working on a lot of things like early childhood education, accountability, tracking students with technology. And then on the federal level too, there's been a wide agreement that No Child Left Behind hasn't worked. That's where a lot of this is coming from, is the Obama administration, not so much the Walker administration, the changes in Wisconsin to public education. So I'm actually kind of a little more jazzed about that than I was a year ago, and we still are graduating the most kids among states. So that's one that I'm definitely going to keep watching it.
You know, if we can end with Milford jazzed, I say let's do it. Thank you all very much. 13, there's more elections, including a Supreme Court election that we're going to have here in the state. So we're going to have plenty to talk about. Thanks for joining me. We're going to come back and wrap up For the Record right after this. My thanks to Scott, Amit, and Brennan for joining me today. Next week will mark the 20th anniversary of the local program Club TNT. Have a great holiday week. We'll see you next Sunday.